Good afternoon. This is the meeting of the Spiny Dogfish Board. My name is Mark Gibson from Rhode Island, and I'm the chair. And I think this is my last meeting, actually. I have 1 hour time slot for this meeting, so in the words of my New England Council chair, let's roll and turbo through this. I think that's what you would say, right? First item on the agenda is the agenda. Are there any suggested changes to the agenda? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving the agenda as presented? Seeing none, the agenda stands approved. Next is proceedings from our August 2014 board meeting. Are there any requests for edits or changes to those proceedings? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving those as presented? Seeing none, those stand approved. The next item on the agenda, item 3, is public comment, but this is for items that are not on the agenda. I'm aware that there is a request to make one comment on the addendum 4 final action. We'll take that up at a later time. Is there anybody requesting time to speak to this board on matters that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to item 4. Anointing the report from 2 reports from Jason Didden on fishery performance and spawning stock biomass reference point update. You have the floor.
Thank you. And so I'm taking over for Jim Armstrong at the council for Spiny Dogfish. Jim accepted a position with the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, and I think is in Alaska as we speak. And so he did most of the heavy lifting on the development of this action, but at least for the time being, will be the contact at the council. Next, please. So these are the already specified measures for 2015. The council did multi-year specs when they did it last. Could you go ahead one? And those are kind of the 2 critical things. ABC at 28,310 metric tons, and the commercial quota at 22,957. Again, that's already specified, and because of how the projections were done, that's just up slightly from the year before. Next. So I was asked to touch on a biological update that Paul Rago would have done. Essentially, there is no biological update. The survey ship broke down and missed a lot of mid-Atlantic stations, so we have no update of stock biomass. So the last thing we have is the 2013 update, which was the stock is above its target biomass and no overfishing occurring. And, with a species with the biology of spiny dogfish, it's not expected with catches in the range of the quota that it actually would change a whole lot from year to year. So the SSC just endorsed what they had previously set for 2015. Didn't see any reason to change. Next, please. And that's a projection trend, and it's still projecting this little dip as we move forward, but not dipping below the target, which is a top dotted line, and that's kind of the same projection as you would have seen last year. Next, please. So just a quick kind of overview of catch over the last few years. The landings were down primarily because of market conditions, our advisory panel reports, but overall landings and discards are in the general range of recent history. Next, please. And you can see the blue line being the landings drop off in the last year, and I'll touch a little bit maybe on some of the reasons for that when I hit the fishery performance report, which is our advisory panel. We ask them to create a report every year for their perspective on things that may be driving landings in the fishery, and there it is. So one, they noted that price last year was quite poor and dampened kind of the interest in fishing for spiny dogfish. Not that any decline in spiny dogfish was responsible for the lower landings. They had to note that price seems to be improving this year. Again, you know, kind of same thing. I'm sure you've heard before. It's really an export-dependent market. The frozen backs have been kind of carrying since the EU has put in some bans because of the contaminant issues. Although we have gotten some recent indications that spiny dogfish exports to Russia, which is where a lot of the frozen backs have been going to, may get caught up in some of these trade sanction things that have been going on between the U.S. and Russia. So even that demand could have some problems going forward, but it's yet to be seen how that fully plays out. In terms of, you know, the overall kind of viewpoint of what folks want to see, you know, consistency has been kind of the overarching input we've gotten, but there certainly is some variability in that. We had a big meeting on when we adjusted the trip limits, and there was a range of people who wanted it wide open to no change at all. The council bumped it up a little bit to 5,000 pounds, and we have rollover provisions in the plan in terms of the actual regulations. So it's essentially 5,000 pounds until changed. A few things, go back to that first one. You know, we also keep getting kind of some input from the AP that they'd like to see a male fishery, that the market name, you know, a potential change to that could be useful for this fishery, that people just don't want to buy dogfish, spiny dogfish, no less. And there's also kind of continued concern of why there is such an apparent speedy recovery of the previously overfished dogfish stock. I think the general kind of idea from the science centers, there must have just been a lot of dogfish outside the survey area, and we can only know the dogfish that are in the survey area, or at least sample it. And so there must have been a lot of dogfish outside of that, and the population was larger than it was thought to be, and allowed it to either recover more quickly, or fish came from outside the survey area to inside the survey area, or some combination thereof. Next. So the monitoring committee, which is council and NIMS and science center staff, saw, you know, no reason to make any changes from their perspective. And next, the council came to the same conclusion and made no changes. So the previously set 2015 specifications would continue on as they are now. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. The questions? Yes, Louis Daniel.
Jason, a good friend of yours and mine, Jim Fletcher, keeps asking about this market name change. Is there any legs to that? What would we do? Because it makes sense, but I just don't know how. I've tried to advise him, but I really don't know how you would go about doing something like that.
I know that Jim Armstrong has had conversations with Jim Fletcher about some potential ways to do that. There are some procedures going through, I think, the Department of Agriculture to, you know, submit requests for formal kind of market name changes. I can kind of follow up with Jim Fletcher where, you know, if he's tried to do that with the Department of Agriculture and kind of explore that further. I'm sure it will be kind of an ongoing issue.
Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason. I guess the question is, I think there's been some, at least, movement towards a more of a male fishery. That's also been something that's been talked about for years, but, you know, my understanding is there really has been some more thoughts given to it lately. At least I think that's the case, but you can help out on that. And I guess the second thing is this testing on the PCBs, is that both sexes, or how does that work?
Since the landings are so predominantly female, I'm guessing it's those. I think it's mostly related to the fresh product, which the kind of there's a certain treatment for the frozen product, and for whatever reason, the PCB testing has not shown high results. I know there's ongoing discussions with the EU for them to adjust their PCB tolerance limits, which are a lot lower than ours, and kind of the results of that negotiation are yet to be decided.
Follow-up, Rob.
Yeah, so I'm taking it that the PCB results are mostly female dogfish oriented, spiny dogfish oriented. And then I just wanted to hear, has there been some planning about a male fishery, more males in the landings, anything like that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, but I know there has been, as you said, ongoing discussion of how it could be done. Certainly there's a large biomass of male dogfish out there, but I can follow up with, and get back to you with some more detail on that.
Any other questions on those reports? Seeing none, is there any other business from the board on dogfish specifications? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, FMP review and state compliance. Marin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a very brief report. It's the Spiny Dogfish FMP review and state compliance. Since Jason touched on the fishery, I'll keep this very brief. Harvest for 2013 was a bit depressed due to the situation in the market, excuse me. The quota was 41 million pounds, but only 16 million pounds were landed. The landing consisted of about 97% female. Recreational landings were 81,570 pounds, which is less than 1% of the total catch. And discards were about 11 million pounds, which is similar to previous years. In terms of state compliance, the PRT reviewed all state compliance reports and found that all state regulations were consistent with the FMP. Delaware requested de minimis, and since their landings are less than 1% of the coastwide landings, the PRT recommends that the board grant this request for de minimis. Thank you.
Thank you, Marin. Are there any questions from Marin on that report? Not. We would need a motion. Accept the compliance report and the de minimis status request. Bill Adler.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the report, the compliance report, the FMP review, and the de minimis status for Delaware.
Thank you. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Rob O'Reilly. Any board discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, motion's approved, unanimous. Next item, Addendum 4.
Who seconded it?
Final action on Addendum 4. I have one request from the audience for the comments. Sonia, come up and read your comment into the record, and then Marin will report on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sonia Fordham, Shark Advocates International. In partnership with our colleagues, we have submitted comments for the record, so I'll be very brief. We appreciate the Commission's consideration of action to address inconsistencies between state and federal regulations with respect to enforcement of spiny dogfish finning bans. To be clear, it is smooth, not spiny dogfish, that are exempted from best practice fins attached landing requirements under the Shark Conservation Act. Accordingly, the National Marine Fisheries Service has revised its spiny dogfish regulations to prohibit at-sea removal of fins. While they're not preferred, spiny dogfish fins do enter the global market for shark fins, the global shark fin trade, in substantial quantities. While there is little incentive for widespread finning of dogfish, consistent bans on at-sea removal of fins across jurisdictions facilitate proper enforcement as well as improved species-specific collection of data for all shark species. And they also strengthen our nation's stance as we promote this best practice of fins attached on a global scale through the regional fishery management organizations. So we urge the Commission to adopt and promptly implement option B to replace any remaining fin to carcass ratios in state waters with requirements that spiny dogfish fins are to be landed with their fins naturally attached. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. I'll go to Marin now and review the options and public comment summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a brief overview of this addendum. It is draft addendum 5 to the Spiny Dogfish Fishery Management Plan. It was initiated in May 2014, and now we are considering it for final approval. As Sonia mentioned, the Shark Conservation Act of 2010 requires all sharks be landed with fins naturally attached. Currently, the Spiny Dogfish Fishery Management Plan allows processing at sea of dogfish with a maximum fin-to-carcass ratio of 5:95. And since a key goal of the Spiny Dogfish FMP is to maintain consistency, this addendum was initiated to address those inconsistencies. There's only one issue to deal with, and that's the fins naturally attached policy. Option A is a status quo. Fins of spiny dogfish may be removed at sea. If fins are removed, the corresponding carcasses must be retained. The ratio of the wet weight of fins to dressed weight of carcasses on board the vessel cannot exceed 5:95. And option B, fins naturally attached policy. Removing any fin of spiny dogfish at sea is prohibited, including the tail. All spiny dogfish must be landed with fins naturally attached to the corresponding carcass. Gutting and processing fish at sea is permitted so long as the fins remain attached by a portion of uncut skin. There was one public hearing held in Massachusetts, and the individual that attended that hearing provided support for option B, fins naturally attached. 5 emailed comments were received, and they all supported option B, fins naturally attached. The LAC had some email communication concerning this issue, and they support option B, fins naturally attached. However, they did note that they would prefer that there was a language change to remove the and processing, and I have that shown up here on the PowerPoint. So the language would be removing any fin of spiny dogfish at sea is prohibited, including the tail. All spiny dogfish must be landed with fins naturally attached to the corresponding carcass. Gutting fish at sea is permitted so long as the fins remain attached by a portion of uncut skin. And they felt that way just to clarify that processing at sea was not allowed. And if this addendum is approved today, the board must specify a compliance schedule. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Marin. Any questions or comments on that report? Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and forgive me if I missed this, but is this all consistent with the federal rules on it? Because I know we've gone through a couple of rounds with the feds on language problems or whatever, so we're all good with the language in both of these?
Yes, this will bring the FMP into consistency with the federal plan.
Anyone else before we go to the technical committee report? None? Bob?
The technical committee agrees that consistency with the federal government is very important, and so as a TC, we support option B, a fin naturally attached policy. We all agree that there is no scientific issues with option B. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm told there is no advisory panel report, so we're at the point of considering final approval of Addendum 4. Doug Groh.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve option B with the following change, that we would refer the law enforcement recommendation that in sentence 2 here, where it says gutting and processing of fish, that the word and processing be eliminated.
Terry, you seconding? Okay, seconded by Terry. Discussion on the motion to approve with the law enforcement language change. Tom?
Yeah, I was just interested in removing the word processing, if anybody's knowledgeable as to whether or not that causes any impacts to current practices.
I'm not aware of any yes, Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a similar question then why are they suggesting that language change to remove processing? I'm not really following that.
It was
Terry? Terry had his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't certainly testify to what the boats are actively doing these days, but a number of years ago when I was dog fishing, we did cut the fish on the way home for a belly. We did separate the bellies and the back flaps while we were steaming in. So I thought the Law Enforcement Committee's recommendation was spot on, and Doug's modified motion, the one I would like to support.
Thank you. Anything else on that issue? Seeing none, are we ready for the question? Need any time to caucus? Excuse me? Oh, read the motion, sorry. Move to approve option B with the following change. Concur with the LEC recommendation to eliminate the words "and processing." Motion by Mr. Grout, second by Mr. Stockwell. See, is there any objection to this motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved, unanimous. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Rhode Island alternate management proposal. We have a presentation on that proposal from Eric Schneider. Bob Beal, sorry.
Back on the addendum, I think you need one more motion, well, actually two more. One to set the compliance schedule, and then one to finally approve the addendum.
Does anyone have a motion? I need a motion to approve the addendum with language change. Doug Rowe.
So the implementation date, I'm going to float one here because I don't think we really discussed this, but I would move that the implementation date be May 1, 2015.
Is there a second to that? Second by Bill Adler.
And this is the only additional motion we would need. Just wanted to clarify.
We don't need to approve the addendum as modified today, too?
Yes, we do need to do that. Apologies.
Discussion on the implementation date. Rob O'Reilly.
Just a question about May 1. As Doug was floating that, what was the thinking there?
Beginning of the fishing season.
I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that? No, Rob.
Doug said he was floating a date out there, and he used May 1, but now he's clarified that it's correspondent with the fishing season, so that was a good answer.
Any other comments on the motion? None. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, that approved unanimous. And now I need a motion to approve Addendum 5 as modified today. Doug Rowe.
So moved.
Seconded by Bill Adler. Any discussion on that motion? Any objection to it? Seeing none, motion's approved unanimous.
No, I just would add that modified today after the word modified.
Oh, correct. There you go. Okay, now I think we're ready to move into Rhode Island alternate management proposal. Eric Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Schneider. I'm a biologist with Rhode Island's Division of Fish and Wildlife. I appreciate the opportunity to give you all a brief presentation. My goal is to provide a summary of the alternative management proposal that Rhode Island submitted to the Commission earlier this month for consideration. As I said, I'll try to be brief and focus only on the major aspects of this proposal. For the benefit of everyone in the room, Section 4.3 of the Interstate FMP for Spiny Dogfish specifies the requirements for an alternative state management regime. And specifically, as you can see on the slide, it states that any state can request permission to implement an alternative to any mandatory compliance measures only if that state can show to the board's satisfaction that the proposed action is consistent with the target fishing mortality rate or will not contribute to overfishing, and also is consistent with the goals and objectives of the FMP. And so, therefore, in accordance with that section, we submitted the proposal that's contained in your briefing packet for consideration. And the problem we're trying to address is really an artifact of a combination of low market prices and trip limits. And both of these make participation in the Rhode Island directed and non-directed spiny dogfish fisheries uneconomical, and that's reportedly resulting in high discard levels and clearly an underutilization of the resource. These concerns were summarized in the memo to the board submitted by the Rhode Island Division of Fish and Wildlife on April 28th, 2014, and was discussed at the spring meeting. And just for clarity, we completely recognize that there are several factors contributing to this underharvest, and as Jason mentioned earlier in his Mid-Atlantic performance report, that much of the landings are explained by market conditions, and so that the availability and abundance of the resource is not really constraining harvest. It's the low price for a dogfish trip that dictates the extent to which fishermen are willing to retain dogfish as part of their catch. And we believe this is, certainly true in Rhode Island. And we also believe that the proposed alternative management proposal may actually improve economics of the fishery, allowing us to more fully utilize the quota in the northern region and do so in a more effective manner by converting some of the landings into discards. And so, as I mentioned earlier, really one of the key aspects of a conservation equivalency or this alternative management regime is to ensure that whatever the action is, it does not contribute to overfishing. And so before I get into what the details of the proposal are, I want to address this topic specifically and what we did to evaluate whether or not our program could or would contribute to overfishing. We tried to assess what the potential total Rhode Island landings would be if all dogfish encountered in state waters were retained and landed. And we referred to this as the zero discard scenario. And this, I won't get into too many details. They are in the proposal, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but I also don't want to take up too much time. In short, what we did was we used Federal Observer data that was collected in NOAA Statistical Reporting Area 539 during the 2010 to 2013 fishing years. And we went through and we selected data from trips that intercepted dogfish. So they didn't have to land dogfish, they just need to bring dogfish on board. And using that data, we calculated gear-specific discard rates. We then use those discard, or I should say, discard to landing estimates. So we then use those ratios to extrapolate what we think Rhode Island landings could look like. And we did that by taking the 2013 fishing year Rhode Island landings. And we went through, based on gear, and applied these discard ratios so that we could extrapolate based on the number of dogfish that were landed what we also think that trip may have discarded. So we arrived at an estimated discard rate, added that to what was landed, and we came up with what was or is an extrapolated landings value under this zero discard scenario. And in short, these results suggest that even if all dogfish encountered in Rhode Island state waters were landed, that we don't expect to exceed 2.1 million pounds. There are some, obvious assumptions there, but even under this extreme scenario of all the discards being landed, we don't believe this would contribute to to overfishing. And just to put that 2.6 million pounds number in perspective, that's about 9.1% of the 2014 Northern Region quota. And furthermore, we really don't think this would contribute to overfishing, especially considering that the proposal contains several conditions that would prevent against that. And I'm going to get into the proposal in just a minute, but while I'm on this topic, some of the things that we included to ensure that we don't contribute to overfishing or adversely impact the ability of other Northern Region states to harvest the available resource is that we included a landings cap, and in the proposal it's 3 million pounds. And I'd like to take this opportunity to note that in the proposal, it was written that 3 million pounds equates to 9.5%. It should have read 10.5% of the 2014 regional quota. So in addition, there's also an 80% cap. So I'll expand on this in just a minute. So here's essentially the proposed alternative management regime that Rhode Island submitted. To summarize it in one sentence, we're proposing to implement a weekly aggregate possession limit of 28,000 pounds per vessel per week with the following conditions. First, all participants must possess a valid Rhode Island commercial fishing license or landing license authorizing them to harvest or land spiny dogfish in Rhode Island. They must land at a Rhode Island DEM licensed state dealer who reports landings electronically using SAFES, and they must report fishing effort via state logbook reporting system or the federal VTR. Rhode Island will monitor landings using SAFES to ensure compliance with the weekly limits and track total state landings. And I'll expand on this just a little bit, that the division, I imagine like most divisions, has a pretty good capacity to monitor landings. We have a quota monitoring team. They meet weekly, and we use our weekly SAFES reporting to try to monitor our state quotas. And this would be another species in which we would certainly be willing to do that. The implementation date of this would be, we'd like to implement it as soon as possible. We would implement it no later than May 2016. And if this proposal is approved by the Commission, Rhode Island will also apply to NOAA for federal consistency, allowing some federally permitted vessels to participate. As I said, the weekly possession limit, the proposed action would be establishing a weekly possession limit of 28,000 pounds per vessel per week, beginning at the start of the fishing season, and when either 3 million pounds are landed in Rhode Island or 80% of the regional quota is harvested, whichever comes first, this aggregate weekly possession limit would end, and Rhode Island would revert to the current ASMFC possession limit of 5,000 pounds per vessel per day. And the last element is that the division requests the authority to exercise or enact seasons as needed. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Eric. What I'd like to proceed now is if there are specific questions on the proposal from Eric, and then after that we'll go to the technical committee report, and then we'll have board consideration of approval. I think that's David Pierce and then Bill Adler.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. There's never been a question of conservation or overfishing. It's about other factors. So my questions are these. Do you have any idea as to how many fishermen would be participating in this program?
That's a good question. We do not, to answer your question directly, I do not have an estimate as to the number of fishermen that would participate. It would be open to all of the Rhode Island licensed fishermen. but I do not have an exact figure that I could provide you.
Okay, so I would assume that this would be an opportunity for fishermen with a Rhode Island state permit, but no federal permit, because they'd be ruled by the federal restriction, correct? Of 5,000 pounds.
That is correct, at least once the commission approves it. If the state of Rhode Island were to simply go and implement it, as I understand it, fishermen with an active federal spiny dogfish permit would be bound by the most restrictive rule, could not participate unless they drop that permit. However, we do intend to submit, if this proposal is approved, we do intend to submit a proposal to NOAA requesting federal consistency for some federal participants to participate. And I know that sounds vague, so to elaborate on that slightly, if there were federally permitted fishermen who met the requirements of this program, such as they had the pertinent Rhode Island licenses, the idea would be that they may be able to obtain a letter of authorization or some other mechanism that would allow them to participate. Right now, that's not the case, and the first step is to seek, board feedback and commission approval.
Okay, that's an important point then. Part of the program, part of the approach would be to request the federal government to have a letter of authorization to allow a fisherman, a federal permit holder, to land 28,000 on one day, for example, if they choose to do that, in excess of the federal limit of 5,000. So you're going to, it's part of the proposal. I didn't realize that was part of the proposal. I know that, as you said, federal permit holders can drop their federal permit, fish in state waters, and then later on get their federal permit back, because this is not a limited entry fishery. And that's why I asked the original question, how many might get involved? It seemed to me that just about everybody who's landing in Rhode Island could drop their federal permit and then take advantage of your program and then get the federal permit back later on. So you've clarified that for me. Another question would be, under the program that you've described, would a fisherman be able to land in Westport in Massachusetts, offload 5,000 pounds consistent with the Massachusetts rule, and then go to Rhode Island and land another 28,000? I think they can, unless there's something very specific that would prohibit that.
That's another good question, Dr. Pearson. There's nothing in the proposal that prohibits that, but I guess if they fished and retained, caught 5,000, went to Mass, I guess I'm under the impression that in order not to violate Massachusetts regulations, they would have to go and fish again. There's the proposal as currently constructed does not contain a daily regional cap on landings, if that's a fair way to summarize it.
Okay, so they'd have to be caught landing in Westport, offloading 5,000, which is probably low probability of being caught, and then they can go on to Rhode Island and land 28,000 more, or land 28,000 in Rhode Island on a given week, a given day in the week, and then the next day land in Massachusetts, 5,000. So this continues to be a question I asked is relevant to weekly possession limits that Rhode Island has for not just spiny dogfish, that which you propose, but for existing weekly limits that you have for other species that do cause some enforcement and monitoring problems. But, all right, you've answered my questions. Thank you.
Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe one of the reasons for something like this had to do with the it's more economical to land a lot, like in a day, rather than stick to the 5,000. My question here was economical and money, and wouldn't this type of a landing just drive the prices right down through the bottom, rather than keep them somewhere near where you can make some money on a dogfish? Wouldn't it, overload the market, I guess I'm getting at?
Sure. I mean, that's a very good point. This proposal was, I guess the impetus for this proposal came from, from our Rhode Island industry. And I know they have had discussions both amongst themselves as to, that trade-off. They feel that they can work together and that what they're trying to provide is more flexibility so that if in a given day they come across more fish, they can retain it. When they scoped the project, it wasn't with the goal of going out and harvesting 28,000 in a given day or doing 2 days, something like that. And so they were, the discussions I've had with them is that they are going to it's not in their best interest either to drive price down. They don't want to work harder for the same amount of money is what they also, certainly want to be cautious of. If they land a lot of fish and they drive the price down now, they need to land more fish to get the same amount of value. And so at least they've conveyed that, they are well aware of that and they'll be cognizant of that and they'll try to work with their fishermen, working with dealers who are in communication with processors as to what the value is and whether it's worth them to land their fish at a Rhode Island dealer to have it trucked up to a processor.
I'd just like to remind the board that what I'm looking for here is questions for Eric on the elements of the proposal, discussion about the merits of it and contingencies and so on. That should happen after the technical committee report when we have a motion on the table to consider approval. I have Rick Bellavance next.
I'm going to pass, Mr. Chairman.
Doug Grout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, one question I had, you talked about this would be open to licensed Rhode Island fishermen. Would that be open to people with non-resident licenses?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't want to guess.
So it's uncertain right now, from your perspective.
It's uncertain only in my inability to answer the question, and for that I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, is from Rhode Island. Do you know?
Would the question, repeat the question for me?
Would this be open to non-resident fishermen? Can someone get a non-resident Rhode Island license and participate in this program?
It will depend on whether we designate it as what we call a restricted species or not. Restricted species that are designated in our licensing regulations are only available to residents. Be honest, we have not included that in this proposal yet. So we will have to think about that.
Okay, could I have a follow-up then?
Yes.
Is this proposal gone to, been run by the Law Enforcement Committee? As far as any input on enforceability of weekly trip limits?
Yes, they've had a discussion on that, and I'll ask Mark to brief the board on that.
We were briefed on Tuesday about this proposal, but we had not, the members did not have an opportunity to actually look at any of the language in the proposal. We did hear pretty good discussion from the Rhode Island representative on our committee about how law enforcement in Rhode Island is perceiving they would be able to address this. But so we don't have a consensus viewpoint. We didn't look at actual written language of the proposal, but we did hear some of the issues from Rhode Island that they felt could be addressed.
Terry?
Pass, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for Eric? Louis Daniel.
Yeah, this may skirt the line of a technical question, but the typical Rhode Island fleet, is it a small boat fishery, big boat fishery, and do you anticipate by going to a 28,000-pound trip limit, call it a weekly limit, but a 28,000-pound trip limit is going to bring in new participants that haven't really been participating in the fishery and impact those smaller boats?
No, that's another good and very fair question. We have not had any, I guess, input or interest from big boats, big draggers specifically, when we've had a series of meetings and discussions, and they have not really showed interest one way or another. Through discussions, not that I've had directly, but in indirect comments given to me, suggest that this still would not be worth their while, given, I guess specifically the way it was phrased was that it would not be worth a big boat's effort, given that they would need and want to land a high quality product to go out and try to retain and land $12,000 or $15,000 worth of dogfish, because most of them just don't have the capacity to do that. And so I'm also skirting the line, to be fair, because this was not conveyed. This is not a discussion I've had directly with the folks who made that comment. It was, through industry and some of their representatives. But I think that's the best I can offer you. So.
Yes, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know we talked about the enforceability a little bit, and I know that the Law Enforcement Committee hasn't had a chance to review this fully. But I was just wondering, Eric, in the context of your proposal, is Rhode Island prepared to increase its enforcement of this at all within the context of this? Because it seems like it would be difficult to, even though they've got the safest reporting requirements and everything, to track the landings. It might be very difficult to track the activities of a boat over a week-long period to ensure that they don't exceed the quota. So I was just curious if your proposal included something like that.
It doesn't include a specific promise or reassurance from law enforcement that they'd make extra efforts, but I do have, the utmost confidence that they will try to enforce this. We do have other weekly possession limits or other species that are managed during the fishing year with a weekly possession limit. One is our fluke aggregate program, and then another, which is the fluke is an aggregate program. We also have a scup aggregate weekly possession limit. And so our Division of Enforcement is familiar with this type of process. And I guess the best I could say is I don't see any reason why they could not enforce this as they do with those other two fisheries.
Thank you. Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious as to how you came up with 28,000 pounds as the weekly trip limit.
28,000 pounds equates to 5 days of the possession limit, or 80% of the 7-day limit. And I think one of the reasons, rather than going for a full 7-day limit, so obviously if folks went out now under the current specs, they could go out and bring in 35,000 pounds in a week. We tried to be careful when we scope this. With all honesty, we really were trying to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to largely impact the other states in the region. That's why we put a cap on the total landings that we thought should be landed under this program. And that's also why, in part, we put that 28,000 pound weekly limit in. I think it also was an artifact that, the balance that I believe it might have been Mr. Adler mentioned earlier, of not trying to flood the market, have vessels land fish that are going to decrease the price. I mean, I think really what our industry is trying to do is have more flexibility so that they can make a trip more worthwhile, but not bring in a glut of fish that's going to really cause the price to crash and, not make it really worth their while anymore to participate.
Any other questions for Eric? Seeing none, I'll move on to the technical committee report.
The technical committee reviewed this proposal, and we agree that from a scientific perspective, the management proposal is not likely to have any impact on the spiny dogfish population. We discussed the potential impact that an aggregate of fish delivered to the processor may have on the market. We feel this could potentially have an inverse effect for Rhode Island, but we agreed that this is a management concern and not a scientific concern. That CC would suggest to Rhode Island that instead of implementing a cap on the program in terms of poundage, 3 million pounds, that they implement a cap in percentage to allow for flexibility of quota or management changes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the technical committee? Seeing none, then I'd like to open the up to a board discussion, consideration of the proposal. I'd like to go to Dave Borden first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to do is I'd like to spend, and I'll do this pretty quickly, excuse me, just provide a little bit more context for the discussion. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up, ask Eric to put up a slide of the suggestions that many of you have made during the past couple of days. So just the background here, I think, is important to reiterate that the division originally came to the commission with the specific intent of raising the trip limit. That was a preferred option that the division came forward with, and as a result of the discussion that took place, that was not implemented by the commission the way we had proposed, and a number of individuals suggested to us, well, do something different under conservation equivalency. So our preferred option, just to be clear, was to raise the trip limit, which would have treated every state around the table equally. Everyone would have had the same trip limit. And the reason we supported that position is because of the problems that we identified in the Division of Fish and Wildlife letter of April 28th. It's about 7 pages long and goes into fairly extensive detail on the problems that are being encountered by Rhode Island fishermen. And those problems aren't unique. The more during the last 2 meetings, the more I've discussed this issue with both commissioners and members of the industry, the problems are not unique to Rhode Island. They're more extensive than that. And so what this comes down to is this relatively little financial incentive for either dealers or trucking companies to truck low volumes of product extensive distances, and particularly at the low prices that we had when we initiated the discussion, which were about 14 cents. And as Eric pointed out, as a result of that, about 75% of the dogfish that are encountered by Rhode Island fishermen are being discarded. Now, I just remind everybody, in the initial, original, existing dogfish plan, this commission identified the need to reduce dead discards. That's one of the objectives of this plan. And in the last year, the only thing that's happened is dead discards have gone up. And that's all part of Paul Rigo's report. So things have changed here. You know, the dynamic of the market has kind of changed. It's firmed up a little bit. The price has gotten better since we initiated this dialogue. But the reality is that some of the problems still exist. those problems, in my view, can get resolved two ways. One is by increasing the trip limit, and the other is by tailor-making a program to try to get at these issues through conservation equivalency. So, Eric, if you could put up the slide, I'd just like to run through these issues, and this will take about 2 minutes to do. These are issues that many of you, including the technical committee, have raised. The first suggestion was to spread out the allocation. In other words, nobody wants a market, least of all Rhode Island, nobody wants a market glut, and the idea would be that to spread whatever allocation Rhode Island got as part of this, if this proposal was approved, spread it over the year. One way to do that is with trimesters. And then the technical committee had recommended that there be a percentage in here so that if the program continued for a couple of years and the quota went up or down, there would be another mechanism that would be included to basically control the amount that's being fished. Particularly if the quota went down, it would basically lower the amount in the program. So Eric had put in and noted that there was a typo in it, but in my discussions with individuals, I basically suggested that we would include like a 9% value. In other words, 9% or 3 million pounds, whichever is left. The other next issue that came up was this issue of how long is the program going to last. I think the simple way to answer that is just put a limit on it, and we would suggest 2 years. The next issue is market weakness. We had individuals tell us basically that the market in August was the weakest, and that the program shouldn't operate there. And I think the way to address that is basically to prohibit the program from operating in August. And then there's a lot of concern, and you've already heard some of it around the table about product quality. And I think this can be pretty simply addressed by putting in a maximum daily limit so that boats don't go out and land 28,000 pounds all at once. And I guess the suggestion that was made to me is that we cap the limit at 10,000. So those are basically the list of comments that I've heard from many of you, and I've talked to the Rhode Island delegation. We would be willing to include those in any conservation equivalency proposal that gets implemented. Now, the last point that I'd like to make is this issue of possession limits, and Dave Pierce raised this issue about landing in other states and kind of tag teaming. The possession limits, everyone should be clear, possession limits should trump. So if Rhode Island had this program in operation and Massachusetts had a 5,000-pound trip limit, or the federal government had a 5,000-pound trip limit, the boats are going to be bound by 5,000 pounds. And they're not going to, if they go into Massachusetts and they've got 10,000 pounds on, they're going to be in violation of the law. So I think I'll stop here and take questions, Mr. Chairman, but we would gladly include all these provisions within the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm almost 20 minutes into the policy board time slot. I think we need a motion to get, more productive board dialogue going. Terry Stockwell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know a lot of work's gone into this proposal, and on the onset, it's quite attractive. It's something that could be applied to Maine and in the other New England states, but I see it at this point fraught with enforcement and monitoring issues. David just highlighted an issue that's been near and dear to me, which is raising the daily trip limit. It would be equitable, it would be enforceable, and it would be accountable. So I'm going to cut to the chase and make a motion that we increase the daily trip limit to 7,000 pounds. And I realize this is another 2/3 vote. Raised up the flagpole in the summer, and I'd like to do it again.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Doug Graf. Okay, board discussion on the motion. David Ferris.
Yeah, the motion is attractive. I thought Terry was going to go for an even higher limit that would have really put me in a difficult position because I'm still trying to be sensitive to the concerns of those in the industry, small boats primarily, who are concerned about too much dogs in the market, depression of price, all of that. However,
I was talked out of 10.
Good. So 7, we can support going to 7, especially because it's a far better alternative than that which is offered up by Rhode Island with their weekly limit. I appreciate what they've done, good work on their part, good arguments on their part, but there are some enforcement concerns, some monitoring concerns, and some other concerns as well that I won't get into in the interest of time. So we'll support the 7,000. I know it's not, I suspect it's not as high as what Rhode Island would want in order to deal with their specific concerns. Maybe it is high enough, I'm not sure. But I hope they would find 7,000 to be high enough to convince them they should move away from consideration of a weekly limit. It's a concept that I really can't support.
So I wanted to, for the maker of the motion, I should have asked it before the rest of the board. How do you envision us moving ahead through a council process that had divergent views on the trip limits as well as NOAA fisheries, which we have already conformed with once and has their rule in place? So just for the May 1st, 215 fishing year you'd be talking about?
No, this would be for the 2015, 2016 specs. Someone's going to do it. And I was thinking, my comrade Bill Adler has always said, why are we always the dog getting wagged by the tail? So if we're going to move ahead and try to initiate a change, there's many members on this board that participate in both the council and in both councils, and we're represented from the Fishery Service here. So if this motion does succeed, then it's the first step of many.
Thank you. I had Representative Peak next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleague, Commissioner from Maine, for making this motion. I think in my heart of hearts, I would, or maybe I should say my brain of brains, I would prefer status quo, but in the spirit of compromise that we spent so many hours working on yesterday, and I think got to a good result with striped bass, in that same spirit of compromise, I think that this is a way to satisfy some of the concerns that have been raised by Rhode Island, while also addressing the concerns that many of the people who asked questions of the scientist from Rhode Island raised. My overall impression as the presentation was given by Rhode Island is that there are as many questions that remain as to the rollout of this as there were answers that were supplied today. I think a significant change like this, it's important in making a proposal to make sure we have the T's crossed and the I's dotted. We're still thinking about who the permit holders might be in the underlying proposal. I think I heard you say, the fishermen say they don't need 28,000 pounds, they just need more. I think that this motion before us is providing the more that they're looking for. We can address some of the fish quality issues, the pricing at the processor. And for me, thinking about some of the small boat fleets in Massachusetts, certainly this lessens the potential negative impact on them and lessens the potential for gear conflict as well. So for all of those reasons, I'd be happy to support this motion.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I appreciate Rhode Island's proposal. They did a wonderful job of trying to address an issue, and an issue that was being addressed because this commission could not support, at least last year, a higher trip limit. if you remember, the New England Council voted to eliminate trip limits, and it was because we were only comfortable with going to 4,000 pounds at that point, despite the fact that we had a majority vote to reconsider that. But obviously, this, just like this motion, that previous motion requires a 2/3 majority to pass this. I certainly supported. My small boat fleet was asking for it last year. They think the market's even stronger this year, and that the market could support it. So for all those reasons, I think it's time for us to stop constraining the market and try and at least give some flexibility here.
Thanks, Doug. Ahead to Dave Borden and then Dave Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I intend to vote for the proposal, but before I do, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the sequence that I would envision taking place. I think if this motion passes, I think the next appropriate step is, and Terry's sitting on the opposite side of the table, is to request the New England Council to put it on its next agenda and formalize a position. And then if the council does that, then I think it's appropriate to ask the Mid-Atlantic Council to do the same thing. Once you get those three groups together, they can forward a recommendation to the National Marine Fisheries Service, and NIMS can then deal with it in the appropriate timeline. They may not be able to get it in place for procedural issues by May 1st, but you can simply say, we want this adopted as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, Dave Simpson.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chair. David helped me with answering part of my question, which was how this might roll out. But at the same time, I heard a lot of discussion about smaller vessels, state waters. Do we contemplate, and is it possible that this could move ahead in state waters only and not be held up by a federal process? Wondered about sentiment about that, and we sort of have complementary management. We're not joined at the hip, so to speak, as we are with some of the other species.
I suppose that's a possible outcome where the commission, to pass this, states could conceivably go back and go through their regulatory process, unless there was a clear constraint from the commission that we couldn't do that. It seems states could go back and go through their regulatory process and put in an elevated trip limit for their state-only permitted fishermen. That's just my view on it. Doug?
Yeah, I agree we could do that, but that would not be the preferred alternative. I think clearly I'd like to move this forward through the council and federal process to see if we can get traction. If we can't, quite frankly, we've done this before years ago where we had a higher trip limit than the feds.
Dave Pierce and Peter.
Yeah, I prefer the approach that was suggested by Doug. Of course, there is another approach that could be taken that I don't find very attractive, but I've already highlighted it, and that is because there is no limited entry. If we were to implement this right away, then someone could simply say, well, I'm giving up my federal permit, and they can then fish in state waters or pretend they fish in state waters and land the state limit. And then they get their federal permit back whenever they want it, because that's the way it works with a non-limited entry fishery. So that's, to me, that's sort of disingenuous. That would be disingenuous on our part, and it would be promoting an approach that, frankly, would run counter to council intent and runs afoul of some of the past reasoning we've used regarding, for example, ground fish controls. Fishermen should have their permit at the beginning of the year. They should keep it. They should not give it up. But in this particular case, they could with dogfish, so it makes far more sense to work with our federal counterparts, and of course, many of us are council members anyways, to have it done in a reasonable way, in a way that everyone will understand, and the councils and the service will support.
Let's say the NOAA fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly a very interesting proposal, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the consistency issue. As we know, the board acted at the last meeting to bring the trip limits in parity with the 5,000-pound federal limit. And above and beyond the consistency issue was also the fact that we've got some federal permit holders. All federal permit holders wouldn't be able to take advantage of this increased limit until if there was any kind of change in the federal regulations. And I believe we'd have to go through the council process, and NIMS would have to do new regulations in order to implement that. I'm not aware of an LOA or any other mechanism that I'm aware of that would allow us to do that without changing the regulations. And that Jason may be able to elaborate on this a little bit more, but I believe the Mid-Atlantic Council has already, since it's already set the specifications for the 2015 fishing year, and I think they also voted to make no further changes to that. So going through the council process may not get the result to come up with a federal change that would be consistent with what the states are looking at here. So certainly it's an interesting concept, a lot more conservative, certainly, than the 28,000-pound trip limit, which seemed to have a lot of enforcement issues and some uncertainty as about how that could be enforced and overseen. But this certainly does, this new proposal here certainly does take into consideration the fact that fishermen are trying to utilize the resource in a more efficient way. So with that, I'll just, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Louis Daniel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points. First, I think I've been approached as the chairman of the commission to just express concerns over consistency, that the fishermen need to have a consistent number, and these numbers have changed from 3 to 4 to 5 and now 7, and that does create some issues and problems for planning. So I think whatever we do, it would probably be a good idea for the New England states to have something remain in place for a period of time. I would normally not even comment on these issues involving y'all. We have our own state quota, but we do 10,000 pounds in state waters, and that's inconsistent with the federal plan. So my two other quick questions. Are you going to take comments from the public? And is it 2/3 majority vote of the members present or the board? Because you might have a problem there.
It's my understanding that we need 9 out of the 13 present. And yes, I was going to take, given it's a new concept, some comment from the public, but I wanted to wrap up the board discussions. Yes, Pete.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just one more point. I was just curious as to whether we have any input from the Law Enforcement Committee or the Technical Committee on the implications of a 7,000-pound limit in state waters.
I'm assuming their comments would be similar to what was for the Rhode Island Conservation Equivalency, but I'll let Scott make the comments.
I think the comment would be similar to what we've always had. Trip limits are more of a management decision and not so much a scientific one. So the quota deals with that. So we would have no problem with it.
Yeah. Law enforcement.
Well, and of course, there is already a 5,000-pound daily trip limit in place. So in terms of Rhode Island's enforcement, they're dealing with that, and so this would not be that much different except the amount. The daily trip limits are somewhat difficult from an enforcement perspective from the get-go, but certainly a daily trip limit, if you look at traditional law enforcement, which is dockside, then it's a manageable way to monitor those limits. The challenge is moving to an aggregate trip limit, such as was been discussed, and there you do need to have the resources, the real-time monitoring of trip data and communications necessary to monitor those individual permitted fishermen that come in with those aggregate weekly limits. But going to the 7,000 pound wouldn't be much different than the daily trip limits that we are used to seeing now.
Okay, I'm going to go to the audience now. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to comment in favor of this proposal? Or I see a show of hands. Anybody wishing to comment against the proposal? Anybody wishing to comment in favor of the proposal? Yes, sir. Yep, public mic.
Hi, I'm Dave Gelfman. I'm a commercial dogfish fisherman. I fish out of Chatham, Mass. I want to comment. I'm not sure if it's favorable or unfavorable. There's a few points that I want you to think about, because you talked about them in your science and in your preliminary discussion. One thing, the male-female marketing. So they don't want the males at the processors. They don't want them. We target females. Right now we're actually having a difficult time catching them. And I think from a science point of view, this is my own observation, but I suspect that your stock assessment is incorrect and that there's more males than females. So you might be overly optimistic about your overall quotas. And this goes back to your daily catch limit ideas, in that 5,000 pounds a day might be worth holding on to for a while, because I don't think your science is fully complete. From a pragmatic standpoint, most of us in Chatham fish out of relatively small boats, under 50 feet. Some of us, myself included, 5,000 pounds is pretty much a maximum load. If there's downward pressure on the price due to increased landings, it will become uneconomical for some of us who are already participating to continue participating. So the guys who are complaining that it's not economical for them to participate yet, I'm not sure what their justification is over our participation. So roughly speaking, I would encourage 7,000 as opposed to anything more. But the fact of the matter is you've changed the daily catch limit several times in very short order, which for some people has had adverse consequences. Some people are now looking at bigger boats. Maybe they're not going to get a big enough boat. Another consideration that may or may not apply is gear type. We're fishing mostly with tub trawl gear, which is hooked gear. If the price goes down, the cost of the bait doesn't go down. That's another reason why our fishery is fragile. We might actually not be able to go anymore.
I asked you to kind of summarize whether your position for or against this motion.
Please keep the limit at 5,000 pounds. Don't go over 7.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience like to comment on this motion? Yes, Ted? Okay. Please, only a couple of minutes apiece. We're well into the policy board's time slot at this point.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm Ted Platts from Newport, Rhode Island. Primarily a monk fisherman. We do some dog fishing in the summer in Rhode Island. Typically, our problem is a trucking problem. I'm one of the few Rhode Islanders that does bring in dogfish because I own my own refrigeration truck, so I can run them at cost and make it work. Most of these guys cannot. The dealers price dogfish down and disincent the fishermen to go after them. And that's why Rhode Island has a hard time landing dogfish between our monkfish seasons in the spring and fall. That's what Dave Borden's talking about when he's talking about what's driving the bus. And, that's our reality. If you're trucking fish from Point Judith to New Bedford, your trucker is going to want 12 cents a pound anyway, and it doesn't leave much. I recognize the aggregate program, our proposal isn't going to go anywhere, it seems. So regarding the landing limit, what I've said before, I'll say it again. If you go up too fast on the dogfish limit, you're going to erode the price structure. If we land 7,000 pounds at 20 cents, or we can land 5,000 pounds at 30 cents, at 7,000 pounds, we're doing more work and we have more gear overhead, and we're making the same or less money. So you're trying to do us a favor, and you're really not. We saw this in the monkfish fishery when the limits went up way too fast, about 10 years ago. I would advocate 6,000 pounds. I know it's well-intentioned. This is totally consistent with my comments on this from the conversation last winter. We need to protect price structure. We need to build markets. And the way you build the markets and protect price structure is you make gradual incremental increases in your landing limit. We just bumped up to 5. I think it'd be safe to go to 6, but I think 7, you're pushing it. And then if the price drops, it's kind of like a seesaw. The picture collapses. We don't want to drop the price. So I would encourage you to rethink 7, go to 6, we revisit it in a year and a half or 2 years, and then we go to 7. Markets love stability, and when we go up too fast, we erode market stability. We're going to erode the price, and fishermen are going to work harder for the same money, and that's not a positive development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Anyone else wishing to comment on this motion? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Luther Bates. I'm a commercial dog fisherman out of Chatham, also a graduate of Cornell University in economics. I'd like to state my preference to maintain the existing 2015 specifications. We have an objective to ensure a sustainable fishery for the next 5 to 10 years, not just capture an immediate opportunity. The biomass I directly observe contains a reduced amount of targeted large females. As such, I would urge the Commission to use caution with any specification adjustments to allow adequate time for direct observation of the fishery status. The trip limit moved to up to 5,000 just 7 weeks ago. I don't believe that that is an adequate time to observe the market, observe the fishery condition, and make an objective analysis and move forward. We need consistency to implement our business models, and I'm concerned about the impact that this measure would have on an increased mortality rate in the industry. If we do have to go to 7,000 or any higher, even 6, I would suggest a seasonal adjustment starting in December. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the board at this time. We're running out of time. Is there any other? The rest in the audience, is there anybody in opposition to this motion that wants to speak? Seeing none.
I'd like to keep it at 5, and the reason I've taken the time to speak, Theodore Legenza, is because the fact of the matter is in the past 15, 20 years, Chatham's landed the vast majority of dogfish, and we will probably continue doing that. But you got to realize when you raise the limit, we have a shallow bar that is 6 feet deep at low water, and about 10 years ago, we lost 2 boats, and this summer, we had another boat that was lost. It wasn't destroyed, but it was sunk. And that needs to be taken into consideration when you raise this limit. You're putting the Chatham fishermen at danger. So I would propose, for a while anyways, keeping it at 5 for that very reason there. I just cannot agree to go up because of the safety of my friends.
Thank you. Is there anyone in support of the motion? You in support, come up and speak to it. Take someone in opposition after that, and then I'm going to close the door on public comment.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Attorney John Whiteside, representing the Sustainable Fisheries Association, the dogfish processors. Prior to coming to today's meeting, my clients had asked me to urge the Commission to increase to a 10,000-pound daily trip limit and oppose the Rhode Island proposal of whatever the weekly trip limit was of 28,000 a week. Given the arguments today and the proposal for 7,000 pounds, we would support that. And so I ask that the commission approve that on behalf of the members of the Sustainable Fisheries Association. Thank you.
Thank you. In the plaid shirt here in front. Yes, sir. You have the last word.
Thank you, Chairman. John Tuttle, Chatham fisherman, 37 years. I gave up a day's pay to come see you today. I think that the 5,000 should stay for a while. We haven't had it in place that long to do a good analysis, and I think that that would be my feeling today.
Thank you. Okay, I go back to the board and to the motion. Is there any more board discussion on the motion? Are you ready to caucus on it? Mm-hmm. And this will be a roll call vote. Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did we resolve the issue of whether or not we need 2/3 of the board or 2/3 of the board present?
Bill.
The rule states that it's 2/3 of all voting members of the board, so that means present or not. The good news is all of them are here, so it's kind of means the same thing today, but the rule reads the full membership.
That means of 13, we need 9 affirmative votes. Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to have Representative Peake.
Just along a point of order question. And for lack of a better word, the Rhode Island proposal, was that a simple majority because we're not changing a trip limit, or would that also require a 2/3 majority to carry?
Yeah, that one's a simple majority since it's essentially a conservation equivalency proposal.
So call the roll. Mm-hmm.
Maine?
Yes.
New Hampshire?
Yes.
Massachusetts?
Yes.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
Connecticut?
Yes.
New York?
Yes.
New Jersey?
No.
Delaware?
No.
Maryland?
No.
Virginia? No Virginia? North Carolina?
No.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Abstain.
And National Marine Fisheries Service?
Abstain.
Yeah, motion fails for lack of a supermajority. Is there any other business to come before the Dogfish Board? Seeing none, we stand adjourned.
We'll get the ISFMP policy board going as soon as we can, so 5 minutes.